That is to say that there was a report that someone had had a conversation with Mladic. We didn't see that. We stayed in the room. Who might have had that conversation and what was carried back and forth and so forth, I don't recall.
Don't you remember that you were given this guarantee into your very own hands in writing, that you would not be stopped anywhere, and that Holbrooke refused this out of his very own vanity, and that's why 4 of your men got killed on Mount Igman in the accident, because the APC tumbled. You cannot remember that, General Clark? 4 of your fellow members of the delegation got killed then. Because of your vanity.
Your Honor, I can assure you I was never given any guarantee in my very own hands that we could travel in on the normal routes. I've never seen such a document. I have no recollection of it whatsoever. Of course, I remember the tragedy on Mount Igman. I think it's regrettable that it wasn't possible to go in on the normal routes. And at the time, I viewed that as a political decision by someone in an effort to delay our ability to consult with the Bosnian Muslim Authority, President Izetbegovic, and Prime Minister Selajic.
General Clark, this is really something that an honorable man should not allow himself to say. You know full well the effort that we made.
This is all by way of comment. You've heard what the witnesses said. You challenge it. Doesn't seem to me we're going to get very much further, and not by sort of abuse of that kind.
And do you remember at least, General Clark, that I was the one who categorically suggested to you not to go via Mount Igman by any means, to take the road around? And that is why we made every effort in order to obtain this guarantee for you. Do you remember that I categorically advocated that you take the normal route, not the path across Mount Igman, and that is why every effort was made for you to obtain this guarantee. You are speaking under oath here, and we have witnesses about this.
Your Honor, we're talking about what I remember and what I don't remember in some kind of a meeting. In this meeting, I don't remember any of this emotion. I don't remember the sort of extreme efforts that the accused is presenting here. I remember an ongoing discussion about whether or not there were assurances that we could in fact get through the checkpoints without being stopped. I recall the conclusion was that we could not. I'm not sure who the conversations were alleged to have taken place with, but I don't have these specific recollections. What I remember is the conclusion of the meeting, and at the conclusion of the meeting we determined that if we were going to consult in Sarajevo, we would have to do so not going through the checkpoints.
You decided not to go there out of vanity, not because you did not get a guarantee. Isn't that right, General Clark? That's why your friends got killed.
Your Honor, this is incorrect.
All right, General Clark. Let us move on to other questions now. You said that you were surprised that I was advocating that Serbia play the main role in the negotiations. Isn't that right? Is that what you said a few minutes ago?
Your Honor, my statement was when the accused said that we should deal with him rather than the Bosnian Serbs, the question then that struck me was, how is it that he could be so certain, and what legal mechanisms did he have to be so certain that if a referendum were held on the peace agreement inside Yugoslavia, that it would apply to the Bosnian Serbs, the leaders of a faction in another country? I was not certain and unclear as to what his authority was over these people. It wasn't clear to me that he had that authority, certainly not legally. And that was the basis for our questions. His answer was, of course, that they would not resist the will of the Serb people, and then I took advantage of the opportunity to ask him personally if it wasn't a matter of legality, then it was a matter of influence, and therefore what was the basis that we should assume he would have had influence over these people if he couldn't have prevented the killing of innocents at Srebrenica?
General Clark.
General Clark, you got everything mixed up now. But let us work our way through this detail by detail, and then we're going to clarify it. Do you remember that precisely because Serbia and I personally advocated the achievement of peace, and we conducted marathon negotiations with the leadership of Republika Srpska. That included the entire leadership of Yugoslavia, Serbia, Montenegro, and Republika Srpska. And the Patriarch of the Serbian Orthodox Church was present there, His Holiness Pavle. We reached agreement to establish a single delegation for the peace negotiations because this was in the interest of the entire Serb people, both in the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia and Republika Srpska, and all other people who live in the territory of the former Yugoslavia. Do you remember at least that?
Your Honor, over the several years of the conflict, we had seen the accused's role as ambiguous. On the one hand, seeming to encourage conflict, and on the other hand, seeming to, at times, support peace. During the period when we began the negotiations, he seemed to be attempting to portray himself as someone in favor of negotiations. And in response to our challenge about his influence, the next time we saw him, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out what we came to know as the Patriarch's letter, which was the idea that there would be a single delegation. It would be comprised of 6 people and that he would have the controlling vote on this delegation. What went into the completion of this, whether or not there were negotiations and how extensive they were, we have no direct knowledge. I have no direct knowledge of that. But I do recall the Patriarch letter.
General Clark.
General Clark, first and foremost, this was no letter of the Patriarch. This was an agreement reached between the leadership of Yugoslavia, the leadership of Serbia, the leadership of Montenegro, the leadership of Republika Srpska. In the presence of the Patriarch, we all signed this letter, including the representatives of Republika Srpska and the representatives of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And finally, it was signed by the Patriarch, too, because in this way he wanted to attach importance to it and to bless the agreement. After all, this agreement does exist here. So during the break, could you please get a copy of this out for General Clark to see, because he is even twisting that.
Mr. Nice, could you try and find it for the accused. Now, what are you alleging that General Clark has twisted?
Iskrivio je sve, gospodine.
He's twisted everything, Mr. May. He's twisted everything. He's twisted the fact that Serbia was the main factor that advocated peace all those years, that Serbia made every effort to have this peace achieved, and that in very, very intensive negotiations, this was precisely attained. That is, that Serbia be actively involved in the peace process, and that the result of that was this agreement, which includes the Patriarch's signature. Had this not happened,
The General should be able to deal, and can only deal, with what he himself knew of the Serb negotiating side. General Clark, can you assist us as to what you knew of the position on the other side? We're now talking about August 1995, as to the composition of the other side or anything of that sort?
Yes, Your Honor. I do recall this letter. We called it the Patriarch letter. Of course, it was an agreement, and it's the agreement that the accused used to demonstrate that he was the person who should be consulted and was the lead for the negotiations. We called it the Patriarch letter for short because it was signed by the Patriarch, among others. That's all.
Generale Clark,
General Clark,
zašto se Srbija I ja lično zalagala
then why did Serbia and why did I personally advocate having a single delegation?
garancije da će se postići
Wasn't it in order to have a guarantee that the peace agreement would be reached? Isn't that right, General Clark?
Your Honor, I believe that the single delegation was the response to the challenge that Ambassador Holbrooke presented in the first session that we had, where we asked him, who should we consult with? Should we consult with the Bosnian Serbs or you? President Milosevic at the time said, you should consult with me, of course. And this is the piece that I have testified about in my opening testimony. This letter merely established the fact that he would have the ability to control the Bosnian Serb delegation, should there be disagreements.
Generale Clark,
General Clark, even what you said just now is not true, because I had advised you to talk to the leadership of Republika Srpska. Achieving a single delegation was, for us, a question of life itself, of peace, of attaining guarantees that peace would be achieved. If you want to remember this, and if you want something to jog your memory, which is obviously not your intention, I suggested to you precisely that you should talk to the leadership of Republika Srpska, and that Serbia and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia would give their maximum support to all peace efforts. At that time, we trusted you. At that time, we really believed that you were interested in peace. Wasn't that the way it was, General?
Your Honor, what I remember of the first meeting was, I don't remember President Milosevic telling us we should not talk to the Bosnian Serbs. What I do remember his saying was that he was the appropriate person to lead the peace discussions.
uopšte
I think
nije
his suggestion was that he advise you, General, to speak to the leadership of the Republika Srpska. Did he do anything like that?
Your Honor, whether the accused advised us to speak to them or not, I don't recall. At the time, they were both indicted war criminals, and so it wasn't our desire to speak to either Karadzic or Mladic.
sad ste došli na polako
Now, millimeter by millimeter, slowly but surely, General Clark, you are approaching the terrain of the truth. You did not want to accept my suggestions to talk to the leadership of Republika Srpska, and you explained this by saying that you did not want to talk to individuals who were indicted for war crimes. Is that right or is that not right, General Clark?
Upravo ste to rekli.
That is just what you've said.
What I just told you is my view. What I remember of the conversation at the time, Your Honor, was we asked the accused, should we be dealing with you or should we be dealing with the Bosnian Serbs? He said, you'll deal with me, of course. And he said, give me the terms of the peace agreement and we'll hold a referendum on them. I don't remember what other sideline of the conversation there might have been. I don't recall whether he would have ever said, by all means, talk to the Bosnian Serbs. The main thrust of the conversation was to establish him in a position of power and control over the process. That's what I took from the meeting. It's what I've testified about.
Well, didn't you say just a few minutes ago that you did not want to talk to the leadership of Republika Srpska? Because you said that you did not want to talk to individuals who had been indicted for war crimes. Isn't that what you said just a few minutes ago, General Clark?
Your Honor, I did say that a few minutes ago, and that is, in fact, true, that we preferred not to have to do this negotiation with these individuals. Carl Bildt had already talked to these individuals, and on the other hand, we were prepared to talk to them if that turned out to be absolutely necessary. It was simply one factor. And it was an irrelevant factor for the purposes of my testimony. As I'm explaining to you and as I've testified, it was then President Milosevic who explained that he was the person who should be dealt with in dealing with, in talking about the proposed peace agreement.
General Clark, this is a complete lie.
We've been over this topic now for about 10 minutes. Let's move on to something else.
General Clark, didn't you say several minutes ago during the examination in chief, or rather what is called the examination in chief here, didn't you say that I had persuaded you to talk to Karadzic and Mladic about the ways in which the bombing could be stopped, that you and Holbrooke and the other members of the delegation withdrew in order to discuss this, namely whether you should talk to them at all? And I had called them so that they could talk to you, and that ultimately you met up with them and talked to them. Is that true or is that not true, General Clark?
Your Honor, this is correct that we did talk to Karadzic and Mladic on a subsequent meeting at the so-called hunting lodge during the time that the bombing was ongoing.
Well, the point of my mediation was precisely for you to talk to the political and military leadership of Republika Srpska and reach agreement on the terms under which the bombing could be stopped. I wanted to help the bombing stop. Wasn't that the main reason? Wasn't that the main objective? Isn't that right, General Clark?
Your Honor, I believe that that is correct, that President Milosevic called these people together. He wanted them to talk to us. As he told us at the time, he said, this bombing is hurting the cause of peace. He wanted the negotiations to proceed, at least that was my understanding. And we did subsequently talk to those people.
Well, all right. At that meeting with Karadzic and Mladic, didn't you reach agreement on the terms for having the bombing stopped. Isn't that right, or is that not right?
Your Honor, it's correct that at this meeting we agreed on a ceasefire to around Sarajevo, and that when that was accepted and implemented, that we would be able to halt the NATO bombing in the fall of 1995.
Dakle, moje posredovanje
So my mediation between you and the political and military leadership of Republika Srpska helped lead to a halt in the bombing and creating conditions for peace negotiations. Isn't that right, General Clark?
This is correct.
a da li je tačno, generale Clark,
And is it correct, General Clark, that this was not your first meeting with Mladic, that you had met Mladic on an individual basis and independently of that before?
That's correct.
kad ste se sreli s Mladićem?
When did you meet Mladic?
On my first trip to Bosnia in 1994, I met with leaders on both sides at the instructions of suggestions of some of my colleagues in Washington. I met with Izetbegovic, Seladic, Delic, and Mladic.
A dobro, da li ste se još s nekim...
All right. Did you meet anyone else from the Serb side then, or did you only meet with Mladic?
I don't recall who else might have been in that meeting with Mladic.
Da li ste išta postigli na to?
And did you achieve anything at that meeting with Mladic?
Your Honor, what I remember about the meeting with Mladic is that we discussed the contact group peace plan, that Mladic was angry, belligerent, refused to agree to the peace plan, and was attempting to threaten the Bosnian Muslims should the United States provide assistance to them. I took extensive notes on the meeting, and it was a helpful meeting for me to understand what it was like to deal with Bosnian Serbs.
Koliko se sećam,
As far as I can remember,
taj vaš susret je bio vrlo srdan.
that meeting of yours was very cordial. It wasn't any kind of quarrel. Isn't that right, General Clark? Your meeting with General Mladic, according to what you told me and according to what Mladic told me, was very cordial. Mladic praised you a great deal, that you had a lot of understanding, and then also you said to me all the best about Mladic. Isn't that right, General Clark?
No, I don't, Your Honor, I don't remember making any complimentary remarks about General Mladic. But at the meeting that I had with Mladic, I listened to his views. I did write his views down. I said I would convey those views to Washington. They were angry. They were belligerent. They were not the views of someone who could agree to stop fighting. And in fact, he did not agree at that time in the summer of 1994 that he would advocate Serbs signing the contact group peace plan at the time. I did my best to bring Mladic around to a position that was more constructive, but I was ultimately unsuccessful in doing so.
Da li se sećate, generale,
Do you remember, General Clark, that Mladic's position then was to stop all hostilities throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina? Well, you told me about that. You told me about your experience with Mladic when we first met with this entire delegation.
I don't remember going into any detail on my experience in the meeting with Mladic, Your Honor. I just simply have no recollection of that. I remember in the first meeting that Ambassador Holbrooke did most of the talking, and I think I was introduced, and the only substantive conversation I had with President Milosevic that I can remember was the one that I have produced here in evidence. I think that the accused is referring to the general Bosnian Serb position, that what they wanted to do was freeze the positions as they were in 1994, in which the Serb side controlled much more than 49% of Bosnia-Herzegovina. That was the position at the time. And that was going to be an unacceptable position in terms of a peace settlement. And that was the Bosnian Serb position. Simply stop fighting, we'll hold on to what we have. As I recall, it was 60 or 70% of the territory.
First of all, you are now interpreting people's intentions, General, and you are saying that people had ill intentions. And as for that meeting with Mladic in 1994, it was aimed at suggesting the cessation of all hostilities throughout Bosnia-Herzegovina in order to promote the peace process. Isn't that?
I'm going to stop the cross-examination continuing on these lines. The witness has told you what he can remember of it. We need to move on to something else.
I really don't understand, Mr. May, what you're actually allowing me to ask this witness.
Not repetition is one thing. We've been over that conversation several times.
Was that conversation between you a cordial one or not? I mean, between you and Mladic.
Your Honor, I did my best to have a cordial conversation with General Mladic. I have to say that it was difficult to do so.
What do you mean it was difficult? There are photographs. A couple of weeks ago, months ago, the Belgrade Weekly NIN carried on its front page your photograph with Mladic smiling, Mladic wearing your cap and you wearing his. It was a cordial encounter. You could have seen this photograph on the front page of the Belgrade Weekly NIN, an issue 2 months ago, I think. I can't give you the exact date, but it's easy to find. Isn't that the best proof that you had a good understanding between you, a cordial meeting in accordance with what I'm saying? Do you remember that?
Your Honor, the best proof of the quality of the meeting is my memory, which I've already described to this court on two separate answers to this question. This was a difficult meeting. I did my best in terms of military diplomacy to take something constructive from it.
Very well, General Clark. Since you said that the Serbs held a large percentage of the area, which is quite true, are you aware, first of all, that their public statements were that they would reduce that percentage of the area and that that is something that they wish to negotiate with the other two sides? Do you remember that? That was the contents of all the talks conducted in Geneva by Owen and Stoltenberg, who also are fully aware of those statements of theirs.
Your Honor, I'm not the expert on the Owens and Stoltenberg talks. At the time, I was not engaged in this issue, and I can't provide any direct testimony about it.
Perhaps you can help us with this. As far as you were concerned, General, was that the Serb position?
No recollection of the details of the Serb position. What I recall was that at the time that I came into the process of trying to bring peace to the Balkans, There was a contact group plan. The contact group plan was rejected by the Serb Assembly in Pale, and in its place was a proposal that simply all fighting stop, and that's what I remember, that they would simply freeze in place. Whether there was anything that went beyond that or not is not clear to me. I just don't have any recollection of it.
So that's a convenient time. We're going to adjourn now. We'll adjourn for 20 minutes.
All rise, we will obey.